Good evening, everyone. I'm Barb Trish, Director of the Rosenfield program, and I'd like to welcome you to the first of two talks this week on the subject of humanitarian aid. The Rosenfield program is pleased to partner with the college's Center for Careers, Life, and Service on this talk tonight. Humanitarian aid usually grips the world's attention at particular junctures in time, in the aftermath of natural disasters or when crisis situations come to a head. In fact, just this weekend, the attention of the U.S. news media has been drawn to the U.S. aid flowing to Venezuela, now part of the storyline that we all think of when we think of that migrant crisis and the political standoff in that country. But while humanitarian aid may seem episodic in the public psyche, the aid doesn't just appear. Either in terms of policy or programs or as implemented on the ground. The talks this week will give us a couple of windows on aid from the perspectives of insiders. In one case, from a practitioner tonight, and in the other from an academic. On Wednesday night, Grinnell professor Leif Brodem will talk about his scholarship that explores the nexus of humanitarian and development policies, in particular, the European efforts aiming to link development projects to migration control. And tonight, we'll hear about the European Commission's humanitarian aid efforts in Afghanistan from Alfred Foehr, who spends his time both in Brussels and on the ground in Afghanistan. Alfred is an international aid officer for the European Commission's efforts in Afghanistan. He has worked for the Commission since 1994. In 2003, he joined the General Directorate for Humanitarian Aid and Civil Protection, ECHO. And since 2018, he has been responsible for the ECHO program in Afghanistan. In his days as a student some years ago, Mr. Foehr studied geography and political economics at the University of Trier in Germany. But in a lucky turn of events, for Grinnell College that is, he also studied with the University of Iowa, where he met Maureen Fitzgibbon. As you know, many of you know, Maureen leads for the CLS at Grinnell, the Government and Social Service community. She is also a member of the Rosenfield program community. I am especially grateful to her for being the glue that connects Alfred to Grinnell College and gives us here tonight a window on how humanitarian aid plays out in a particularly critical region of the world. So, please join me in welcoming to Grinnell, Alfred Foehr. Thank you.
Right. Good evening. Thanks for coming. Thanks for your kind and flattering introduction. I would what's that? Okay, we'll come to the pictures later. In any case, my name is Alfred. I live in Brussels, in Belgium. I work for the European Commission. The European Commission is one of the key bodies of the European Union. And what I would like to do this evening is the following. I will tell you a few words about the European Union as such, as a wider organization, also to place a bit my activity in the wider policy of the Union. After that I would like to speak about Afghanistan. I'm the person who's not in charge of Afghanistan at the European Union, but it is that I'm in charge of the humanitarian aid which is happening and which is being implemented in Afghanistan. I'm not really a PowerPoint person. The death by a PowerPoint fraction I don't want to be part of. So please listen to me. I'll try to make it as interesting as possible, maybe even throw a few questions at the audience. and then there should be 2 interruptions in which I show you some pictures from the ground from my work in Afghanistan. Why am I here? Barb already made the introduction. A very long time ago, 35 years as a matter of fact, incredible it sounds, I studied at the University of Iowa in Iowa City, and in that context, you know, I maintained the connection here to the American heartland, to Maureen in particular, who's now working here at Grinnell, and through that, and we've seen each other a number of times during this period, we organized my little visit here to Grinnell and my presentation this evening. I should say one thing which is very important. I am not a politician. I'm not the official representative of the European Union here this evening. So every now and then I might say some things which may be politically incorrect or whatever. Please don't quote me. Please don't take. I don't want to read anywhere that Alfred Foehr said that the Afghanistan aid by the European Union doesn't work very well, or the UN is not effective. Please don't do that. You know? So I'm here. Obviously, I'm a civil servant, so my work is transparent, and it shall be. I have nothing to hide, but I'm not a politician. I'm not the official spokesperson here. I'm barely here to share our activities and to share my opinions on what we do in Afghanistan. Quite an important point for me. Right, the European Union. Start with that. It's a big place. I asked the question this morning already in class of one of the professors. Who knows how many member states the European Union has?
28 or 27.
Still 28. You're good. Soon 27, obviously. Yeah. 28, so many, many countries. If you see it on the map, you know, on the left-hand side, west, you have Portugal. On the other end, northeast, you have Finland. So it's a really big place. Most of the European Union's institutions are based in Brussels. There is the big EU institutions. The most important one, I may say, is the European Commission, which is the institution I'm working for. Commission, you have to imagine it as, the EU is not a government, to be very clear, but the European Commission, you have to imagine it like covering different policies, like a national government would be, and one of the policies, a very small policy, as a matter of fact, in terms of budgetary support, is the humanitarian aid. I have to log back into it, shall I? Yeah, excuse me, I'm afraid I have to do. But then it will switch off automatically again, I'm afraid. Because, okay, yeah. Right. Where did I stop? Yeah, the European Commission. So, the European budget, the European Commission's budget, annual budget, to give you some idea, is, I wrote it down someplace, where did I have it? I know the ECHO's budget, but the European, yeah, exactly, 160 billion euros. And I would like to clarify this, 160 billion euros, that's 160,000 million euros, because there's always this confusion between billions and milliards. So that is a lot of money. What is dedicated to humanitarian aid of this budget is 0.7%. So DG ECHO has a budget of 1.1 million euros. That's the budget coming from the member states. Again, 28 of them. Population of the European Union, by the way, is about 500 million people. The European Commission is managing these monies. So again, ECHO, my department, the humanitarian aid department, is 1.1 billion euros. Before I go into the details of what ECHO does, let me just say a few, 2 or 3 more things about the European Union as such. What do you know about the European Union nowadays? What is the big thing everybody talks about, obviously? It is the Brexit, right? Which is ante portas, happening on the 29th of March. Nobody still knows exactly how this will happen, how this will be managed. There have been many, many smart people in Brussels and in the UK working on this for more than 2 years. Without yet, I mean, it's only a month away, seeing clearly how this will be managed. The Brexit is a very big thing. It will take the 28 member states down to 27 member states. The original treaties haven't really foreseen that a member state would exit the Union, which makes it a very complicated procedure. The Brexit has very, very massive implications on our policy, also on humanitarian aid, because UK is one of the big contributors to the budget. If UK goes, in an overall calculation, about 15% of the EU budget will not be available anymore, because this is what the UK contributes into the common account. UK is the second biggest contributor, the biggest one is Germany, and the third one would be France. Other issues around the European Union, you know, coordination, 28 member states, soon 27. How do you get your act together? How can you create common policy? Again, EU is not a government, but in most decisions which are taken, the opinions of the member states matter, and there is very complicated voting and decision-taking mechanisms, which sometimes make it difficult to come to conclusions. Well, that is the nature of things when you have 28 countries working together. So coordination is difficult, and then another trend I would like to mention, we see it not only in the US or in some other countries of the world, we also see it in Europe. There is a general trend to conservatism and nationalism. We have now a few member states which have rather nationalistic governments, for example in Poland or in Hungary, and then you have other member states where you don't have nationalistic or slightly nationalistic governments, but where you can see that the conservative forces or the more nationally minded forces are gaining ground. There would be many of those countries. Such as France, Austria, to a certain extent also Germany, even the Nordic countries of the Netherlands. That just as a background about what's happening in the European Union as a wider political organization. Right, now I'm focusing slowly on what is the main focus of my presentation. DG ECHO, we do humanitarian aid. A small policy, less than 1% of the EU's budget, 0.7, I mentioned before. The 0.7 sometimes can be topped up. If there's a major crisis, it could become 0.8, 0.9, or some additional funds are made available from the member states in emergency situations. But what I really want to say here is that while my heart is very much connected to it, and I consider humanitarian aid super important, in the wider picture of European policy, as it is in the national context, you know the humanitarian aid bit is relatively small. We must not overestimate its relevance in terms of the global politics. There are principles to humanitarian aid policy, principles to the DG ECHO work, which are very important, which is why I would like to mention them. The principles are humanity, neutrality, impartiality. Humanity means that we are addressing those people, it doesn't matter where they live and what they do, on the globe, which have the biggest need for humanitarian aid. We are not fighting poverty, that's something completely different. Humanitarian aid. We are politically neutral, which means that the humanitarian aid policy shall not become a bargaining chip in the wider political picture, as it is very often done with development policy, for example. It's not like, you know, this country doesn't open its barriers for trade, so we don't give any humanitarian aid. That's not how this is not the way it can be. But the driving force is a ethical motivation, and we shall remain neutral and focus on those which are in the which have the biggest needs. And we are impartial. We don't have any political affiliation, and are ready to go wherever we need to go because of the humanitarian needs. We are not a political organization. Now, after making this speech, making this point, however, the world is not black and white, and there are incidents nowadays where there is a little bit of a politicization of our work in any case, but still, compared to any other policy, we are relatively neutral and very straightforward in what we are doing. Equally, ECHO is not the development department of the European. There is humanitarian aid, there is development, and then in between there is, we call it the nexus. It's a fashion word, you know. Of course, the two policies should be linked, but still there is a substantial difference between humanitarian aid and development. What's the difference? Well, humanitarian aid is non-political, it's fast, it's a priori short-term, although that doesn't always work, and we normally do not work with governments. This is very, very different from how development policy normally works. We don't give our money to the government in Afghanistan or to the government of the Democratic Republic of Congo or any country we work at. We work with NGOs and we work with the UN. They implement for us. We don't go via government. We are fast. We are one of the very, very few bodies, offices in the European Commission which can react really quickly. Because if you do humanitarian aid, you're addressing immediate and acute humanitarian needs. If you go through the standard political decision processes, it will take weeks, and then you know the case is lost. If you have the earthquake coming, or the tsunami, or the hurricane going through the Caribbean, or you have the sudden influx of the migrants from Myanmar to Bangladesh, you have to react quickly. So we really have this privilege of having the possibility to be quick if we have to. It's quite unique, if you know how big political international bodies work. And conceptually, we wouldn't like to stay forever. We would like to help, do the humanitarian work, and then hopefully at a certain stage, development or local government is taken over. Now this is at least the idea. Of course, it doesn't always work. Where does DG ECHO work? I'm with the ECHO office for many, many years. We've been, in the meantime, we are focusing a bit more on the Middle East also and Africa, but traditionally we've been really working around the globe, from Samoa to Argentina, wherever there was, when there was the big humanitarian crisis in the early 2000s, for example, ECHO was in Argentina. We intervened even with the tsunami in Chile about 10 years ago, but we would also be on the Philippines after the big tropical cyclones. We would of course be in Southeast Asia, mainly Myanmar and Bangladesh. We would be in Central Asia. We would be in Afghanistan. We work a lot around the Middle East crisis, Syria crisis. Then, very importantly, we have a lot of activities in Africa, mainly in the Sahel, sub-Saharan Africa, but also in some other places. We even used to have projects in Madagascar at the time. Then, if you carry on with the geography, we are very active also in Haiti, and to a lesser extent in Central America, and even in some South American countries. And it's give and take. We are normally not permanent at a place. We are there when there is a humanitarian crisis. Of course we are permanent at some places, like Afghanistan, like Somalia, like Congo, DRC, Democratic Republic of Congo, like Haiti, where we have a protracted humanitarian situation. We also have a particular policy addressing what we call forgotten humanitarian crisis, because there's a couple of things going on that absolutely nobody knows about, and yet it's dramatic humanitarian situations. For example, we have these camps, forgotten camps in southern Algeria, or we even have activities around the displaced population in Colombia, which are topics and humanitarian scenarios that are not very much on the screen of the wider public. What do we do? The humanitarian work. The main topics are we do food and nutrition, but ad hoc, not in a permanent way. We do health, very much trauma care. We, for example, deal with the big, we did a lot of work around the big Ebola crisis in West Africa, which happened a couple of years ago. Now in Congo there was Ebola again, we were involved. Epidemics, it's a big thing we try to address once they break down. Cholera in Haiti, for example, there's many other examples. We do shelter, so if displaced population needs a place to stay, we try to provide such a place for temporary place for some time in a way that support would be available for 6 to 12 months. We do water and sanitation, very important. The non-available clean water or the lack of safe water is one of the biggest problems in any humanitarian situation, which has immediately a massive spill-off towards the health of the affected population, all sorts of illnesses coming through the water. So water and hygiene is one of our activities. We do the what we call, and this is a bit difficult to explain, we have a protection policy, which is like promoting international humanitarian law and the respect of the mutual respect of warring parties, or also respect for the most vulnerable of populations, very often women with children. We promote that. It's our protection policy. It's actually a cross-cutting issue. And we do now, this is a little bit the fashion subject nowadays, coming down from our commissioner, politically wanted. We are involved in education in emergency now, because we consider that education, even in the worst scenario, humanitarian scenario, is a very important topic to cover, in that children in whatever catastrophic situation, after the earthquake, in the civil war, in a massive situation of displacement, that such children have the possibility to receive basic education. I'm not talking about going to school until you're 17 or 18, but in that kids have 2, 3, 4 hours of schooling every day. We also do at some places horizontal support, like in terms of supporting security measures for NGOs, or supporting communication or transport infrastructure. I will say more to that later on when we come to the Afghanistan dossier. We work through NGOs, so we have the money, big funds, on a humanitarian scale, big funds. We give them to NGOs, or the United Nations, or international organizations. We call them partners, these guys, NGOs, UN. They have a very particular, very clearly defined job to do, and they implement for us, and we of course go and check and see if everything is done in the way it was intended to be done. Right, leave it there. Of course, we remain responsible for the funds. We have, ECHO has the money we have, the money we use, the money we invest into humanitarian aid, we give to partners, is funds from the European taxpayers. And we as a DG, as an office, we are under constant pressure to show that we are efficient, that we have to be able to display that the funds are used for the intended purpose, that there has been no corruption, that things have been going straightforward, and that no money has been deviated left and right, that the procurement was done correctly, that everything is well documented, and so forth. This is an important chapter of our work. I know it very well, because that's really the job I've been involved in for many years before I started to deal with Afghanistan at ECHO. And there is a complete control and management and accountability cycle which we have to follow in order to show that the funds are used for the proper purpose and for what they were intended to be used to. It is difficult. When you work in countries like Burkina Faso, or in Afghanistan, or in North Korea, for example, you know, it is very difficult to control, and because there's access limitations, and you cannot always see what you would wish to see, and so forth. So we try to minimize the risk, we try to be accountable, but at the same time, beyond the risk minimalization, we accept a basic risk. Because if you don't accept a basic risk, you can simply not fund humanitarian aid operations. It's part of the deal. If you don't want to have any risk, if you have zero risk tolerance, the implication would be that you stay out of the business and you'll shut down the budget lines for humanitarian aid, which is not what we want to do. I come to Afghanistan as an introduction. Afghanistan, you see it on the map, Central Asia, landlocked, no coastline. On the left, west side, you have the border with Iran. On the east, you have the border with Pakistan. In the north, you have Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, and Kyrgyzstan. Afghanistan is a big country, 650,000 square kilometers. That's about slightly smaller than Texas. Population is 35 million. So it is not a densely populated place. You have a couple of cities, but then you have large parts of the country which are very little populated. It's a country of very much of deserts and mountains. It's a beautiful country, as you will see. A harsh environment. It's multi-ethnical, multilingual. Main language is Adari and Pashtun, but you also have people who speak Uzbek or Tajik and local accents in the Hindu Kush, obviously. It's called the graveyard of empires. It's one of these areas which were never really conquered or invaded. The British tried, the Russians tried, much longer time ago, the Persians tried, and but Afghanistan, or the geographical area which we call Afghanistan, has never been colonized or conquered as, for example, would have been the case with India. And before I go on here, I would like to show you a few pictures to start with. And then I will tell you more details about our work in Afghanistan.
You think my password?
No, it's not that.
I'm getting it. Right. I mean, it's a bit of a... Those pictures are from my visit in late November. It's a bit of a mix, not too scientific. The people of Afghanistan, you know, these kids you see, that's typically the crowd you have whenever you go and you stop. Immediately you have the children waiting for you, and they're quite excited and quite happy. Another one of those. Those people are my supporters and collaborators. The gentleman on the right-hand side is working for DG ECHO. He's one of the local employees at the Kabul office. The gentleman on the left-hand side is working for one of the NGOs, the Danish Refugee Council. We collaborate with. Typical situation, they always bring their food for these field trips, and they want to share it with me. Very competent local people, which you have in Afghanistan, many of them. Now have a good look at this picture, because here we are already approaching what we are doing in humanitarian terms. That's a father with his son. If you look at the boy, there will be more pictures of the boy in the second picture session. I don't know if you notice something there on the picture. The boy is hiding his arm, right? His right arm is not really there because it has been amputated, but we'll come to that later. What I want to tell you, it's a beautiful country, as you can see. This is the long distance travel in Afghanistan is always done by small plane, because otherwise it's not safe. And this is like, well, the western side of the Hindu Kush at the end of November before the snow comes. Really nice. Quite something to see. And you see it's dry, it's empty, it's beautiful, it looks wild in a way. That's the plane we've been flying with in that case, built in the US by the way. It's a Kodiak built in Idaho, the pilot told me. And it's this kind of low, non-pressurized cabin flying, and you sometimes sit next to the pilot, and the pilot being from the US, as a matter of fact, you see his stripes there on the left-hand side of the picture. It's quite an impressive way of traveling, in particular flying over such an empty and beautiful space. Again, the only safe way for traveling long distance. And here we have another one. Quite typically, wherever you go, in our office, in the delegations, in the embassies, in the cars, you always have these, how do you say, gilets de sécurité, you know, these security vests and a helmet. And when something is happening, or there is a warning, or there is an alarm, or somebody starts shooting, you're supposed to put these things on. You also see those here are the vests in the ECHO office. You see the European logo there on the vests. So the security threat, or the non-security, is always in the air, whatever you do and wherever you travel. Right, and here's another one, and here we're approaching already, and that's the transition to the continuation of my presentation. This would be one of the IDP camps. IDP standing for internally displaced people. These camps would have been, in that case, sponsored very much by ECHO. NRC, these, you know, those are people who had to leave their home for various reasons. I come to that. We are at the beginning of the winter, and this is where they will spend their winter at, in these camps. The winters, by the way, in Afghanistan are very cold. NRC stands for Norwegian Refugee Council, one of the very important NGOs we work with. They're very big, very important in Europe. Supported also by the Norwegian government, which is a rich government. So in that case, NRC Echo tents, and you see up front at the bottom of the picture you also have this tent which has UNICEF written on it. UNICEF is one of the other providers. And there on the left-hand side of the picture you have these two tents of people who arrived a day or two or three before, and who had not been supplied with their shelter or their tent yet. Right, and I will show you more pictures in a few minutes. So let me continue with Afghanistan. I mentioned it's considered the graveyard of the empires. The big pull-out of the international forces in Afghanistan, well, the big event in the more recent history of Afghanistan was really the invasion of the Russians in 1979, as you may know. And this was also a turning point in the sense that this is when the country slowly started to go down the hill, and then there have been many other things. There has been the 9/11 event, international troops coming in 2001. Most of the international troops left in 2015, particularly the American troops, also other international forces. Nowadays there is 15,000 US troops left, more or less, and as you may have heard, and as is being discussed, you know, there is a possibility that those might be retracted in 2019, subject to confirmation, and we don't really know what that would mean for the country. Geopolitically, you have many other countries on the plan there. You know, the Pakistanis on east of Afghanistan, they have a vested interest in the country. Then you have, of course, Iran going through a crisis itself due to the embargo in the east, and then you have the Chinese on the plan who are very interested in Afghanistan also. So what are the big humanitarian issues in Afghanistan? We have a humanitarian crisis because there is an ongoing civil war, a civil conflict. You know, there's many different narratives on Afghanistan. I'm having the narrative which comes, of course, from the humanitarian perspective, which is a perspective telling us that the situation in terms of the quality of life of the simple countryside population has not improved, but is rather developing negatively. The number of casualties in Afghanistan, more than 10,000 civilians in 2018, is higher than in any other year in the last 15 years. So what I'm saying is casualties are up, figures are not improving. Further to the ongoing civil conflict, we have a drought in the west and the northwest of the country, which has been building up over the last 3 years, in all probability related to climatic change, global climatic change, and this has now been having a massive impact on the agricultural population in the northwest of the country. Massive impact means that people had to leave their villages and flock to the few cities they are in order to obtain humanitarian aid because they couldn't continue their minimalistic agriculture anymore. The story is that it hadn't snowed in the Hindu Kush mountains in the last 3 years. So in spring the rivers do not carry the water anymore from the mountains in order to irrigate the fields, and then you can't do much anymore. Further to that, we have a very complicated political situation regarding Iran. Again, there is the embargo happening. Iran has been hosting about 4 to 5 million Afghan refugees within the last 10 to 20 years, because many Afghans left Afghanistan to find a job, to find a livelihood in Iran. Now those people are now being pushed back into Afghanistan, which means that we had like 800,000 returnees, deportees from Iran coming back to the country, to Afghanistan, and these people don't have a place and no livelihood to go back to. So there we have like 800 people in 2018 alone coming back to their home country with no place to go and too much hope and perspectives. So there you have the three main factors: the ongoing civil conflict, which is not improving but getting worse, the drought, and the returnees from Iran. There is more about migration in Afghanistan, but I shall stay to the big lines of my presentation here. Then we have, of course, a government which I would consider dysfunctional. There is plenty of ethnicity, decision-taking, tribalism, nepotism, corruption. The government may be able to take a few decisions which work out in Kabul and in the surroundings of Kabul, but the government doesn't rule the country. Generally speaking, nowadays we say that about 50 to 55% of the area of Afghanistan are under government control. About 25 to 30% are disputed, half Taliban, half government, or there is some fighting happening, and 20% are totally out of control of the government, which means the local warlords, the Taliban, are the reigning party in those parts. And again, the situation is not getting better. You may want to know that there will be presidential elections in Afghanistan in July of 2019, and we'll have to see what will come out of that. It's absolutely unclear what will happen and what the perspective in terms of these elections is. If I speak to my humanitarian colleagues, there is very few of them who have an optimistic view of what will happen politically in the next 1 or 2 years. But this is just one strand of opinions, obviously. What are the needs? What do people need? I mentioned before we have a population of 35 million. The Humanitarian Response Plan for 2019, for this year, established by the United Nations, is calling for humanitarian aid in the order of 500, no, I must not make a mistake here, exactly, humanitarian funds of 500 million euros, which should be made available, that's $600 million. To do what? I give you some figures. There's 12 million people affected by the drought. Affected by the drought doesn't mean that everybody is suffering in a humanitarian sense, but 12 million people are affected. That's about 30% of the population, more than 30% of the population. 4 million people in Afghanistan are food insecure. When you go through these camps, like the picture I showed before, and you speak to the people, and you ask them, what is your problem? They have many problems. They're completely hopeless. But the first thing they tell you is, we don't have enough to eat. That doesn't mean that they're close to death because of starvation, but they're food insecure, and they're definitely under the minimum food requirements that are expected to be available. We have about 2 million IDPs, internally displaced people in Afghanistan. Those are people who live in camps, such as I showed on the picture before. We had in 2019 alone, 2018 alone, 600,000 new IDPs, mainly due to drought and conflict. We have the influx of the deportees coming from Iran. We have probably an influx of deportees from Iran being continued in 2019. We expect returnees in the order of 500 to 600,000. So what does it mean to be an IDP or a deportee in Afghanistan? It means you don't have a home, you're not at your place of origin, you don't have food. You have food, but you don't have enough food. You are food insecure. It's a situation of chronic malnutrition, which immediately leads to all sorts of health issues, in particular with families and with children. You don't have a place to stay. Afghanistan is a cold place in winter, I would like to repeat that. You are with your family in these tents, if you're lucky, which were provided by the humanitarian community. You don't have sometimes a territory where you can pitch your tent, because the land is owned and the landowners want to have a rent and so forth. You have no education for your children. I'm not talking about big education, I'm talking about minimal education. I'm talking about kids being able to go to school 2-3 hours per day. You don't have a livelihood. There is no economic base for your life. Very often you may have come from Iran, but you're pushed out of that. You're coming from agriculture, which you cannot continue anymore because of the drought. You have nothing. So we provide basic aid to help there. More than that, and I shouldn't forget to say, there is very little hope for many of these people. They've been living in a dire situation, in a marginal situation, which has gotten worse recently for a long time, and now they find themselves, these IDPs, they find themselves in these camps without too many options and possibilities to do something or to earn $1 or something. There is the occasional daily labor available in the urban centers close to which these camps are located, but that's it. Political stability is also not available. The political outlook is, to say the least, not clear. So what does ECHO do? Again, I think I mentioned this over dinner. We made 46 million euros available in 2018. And we start with 25 million in 2019, which will probably be topped off so that we come to some figure between 40 and 50 million again in 2019. We have about 20 projects with partners, NGOs, United Nations, we try to address the before mentioned humanitarian needs, mainly towards IDPs, drought-affected people, and the deportees from Iran. How do we do that? We try to provide basic nutrition, but this is humanitarian aid. We'll shoot for the most affected and most vulnerable populations. We don't offer a permanent situation. That is, you've got to understand that, because that would then be the development side of things. So we'll try to provide nutritional aid. Very often this is done by providing cash, because Afghanistan, despite of all the poverty, there is also some economy and some markets there. So by providing basic cash to families, that will open the door to them to go to the market and buy some rice, some oil, some pulses, and some flour, which are the most important things people will eat. We do this very much in cooperation with the World Food Program, UNWFP, who obviously have the lead in nutritional support. By the way, very much supported and directed by the American government, WFP. We provide basic health care, that is mainly trauma care. Remember this picture I showed? There will be more pictures of that kind. Remember the picture of this boy who was hiding his arm? His prosthesis he will receive it thanks to the ECHO funds in an ECHO supported health facility. We deal with the war-wounded and the most vulnerable. We don't offer permanent medical care to the wider Afghanistan population. It's simply not our mandate. We can't do that. Development should do that, or the Ministry of Public Health, which will be aided by development agencies, should do that. And it's a problem, but we are humanitarian aid workers. We cannot save the world. We can save and help those which are in the biggest need and those which are suffering the most. And then we do, of course, a lot of water and sanitation work. Clean water, safe water is one of the very essentials of any humanitarian aid work in camps or in communities of displaced. It's a very easy, well, how should I say, it is something that we take for granted in our civilized organizations, but once you have civilized countries, but once you have bad water in one of these IDP camps, you have populations which immediately get ill, and given the poor average health of people there, many people will die, many children, the children in particular. Right, we also do what I mentioned before, the protection work, which is like a cross-cutting thing. It is help based on gender. We have a particular eye on that women with their families are being helped, which is not evident at all in Afghanistan, where a woman by herself cannot accomplish very much. Even if a woman can normally not go to a government office and ask for something. She can only do it, now you may laugh, she can do it if she has a 10 or 11-year-old son, and the son goes with her to the office, and she will be accepted to be spoken to. If she goes by herself, depending on who's there, she might just be waved away. This is what we have. Promotion of international humanitarian law. We speak to the warring parties in the civil conflict, through our partners obviously, to have some basic respect for humanitarian needs and let the humanitarian actors access the areas so that they can help, which is not evident at all. And we provide, again, a bit fashionable subject, but probably for very good reason. We try to provide basic education for the youngsters and children, of which there are very many, because, well, anyway, that is the future of only an educated population might ever be able to change the country, but it's also a structured educational system, even if it's very simple, is kind of bringing stability and integrity to a camp or to a given population. Also the parents obviously like this normally very much. Also education for girls, by the way, which is an important factor. We also do some horizontal support for coordination of humanitarian aid, a very important issue. You have many actors in Afghanistan, but you know, through UN OCHA, which we fund, UN OCHA is the UN coordination body for humanitarian aid. Through those guys, also with our support, we'll try to make sure that things are done efficiently and in a coordinated manner, and that whatever actor is doing what he can do best at the respective geographical area. We also facilitate transport. For example, this small plane which you saw on the slide, these MAF Mission Aviation Fellowship, a UK partner, they are sponsored by us also. We cover large parts of their expense in order for them to facilitate this air service to us and to our partners. Right, and it's getting long already, I can see that. Let me just say, what are the complications? Main complication is security. We would like to help, but we cannot access because it's not safe. We take our life in our hands. Me, when I'm going there, but in particular the people who do the work on the ground, my colleagues in our office in Kabul and so forth. Security access. To control our work, in that we can go and see and have a check if the money has really, or the funds or the project is really going on according to plan, very difficult. Which makes it difficult if you cannot do that. I mean, our funding bodies, the member states, are very critical, and they will say you have to do that, otherwise there will be no funds in the future. Coordination, I mentioned already. Cooperation with the Afghanistan government. Sometimes you will not understand that. Sometimes government, for whatever reason, they just don't want us to be there. Although we just want to do humanitarian aid, they feel threatened, they feel undermined, they feel that we are pointing at something that they don't want to see. So that is a problem, and well, ethnicity in Afghanistan playing a big role, and obviously, I mean, the bottom line is it is difficult and risky to work in Afghanistan, but yet ECHO, the European Union, decides to have this program and accepts a basic risk which we try to manage and to minimalize, obviously. Some good news also, what has been achieved in Afghanistan in the last 10 years, 15 years. The business figures, the economy has been picking up a little bit, if you look at the overall figures. And in particular, the situation of women and girls in Afghanistan has significantly improved in the last 10 years. In that not everybody needs to be completely covered nowadays. There is a certain level of tolerance. Many, not many, but large portion of the girls nowadays can go to school, which would not have been possible 15 or 20 years ago at all. And the risk is that if international troops leave, and depending on the results of the elections which are coming in July, that these achievements may slowly start to disappear. Where are we going with Afghanistan? My humanitarian colleagues working on the ground, many of them very experienced, they have a rather, they draw a rather grim picture. They have a bias, obviously. They see all this from a humanitarian angle. Much will depend on the elections and what's coming out of it, and if the results of the elections will be accepted, and whoever wins, very difficult to predict, even for the absolute expert of the political situation in Afghanistan. You may have heard that the Taliban somehow, there is not the Taliban, by the way. I mean, the Taliban are many different strands, and they are not, this is not one entity. There is talks between the US and the Taliban in Qatar happening at this moment. They are called peace negotiations. The problem is that, from my understanding and what I hear in the political talk in Brussels, that the Afghanistan government is not involved in the talks. Yet these talks are going on, and the US wants to broker possibly a peace deal. Now, why does the US want to broker a peace deal? I mean, I think it's written on the wall. This is more related I believe people better informed than me believe that it is related to the electoral campaign in the United States, in that the president of the US wants to show a peace deal before the end of 2019, to hold it up and say, here, look what I did in Afghanistan. I'm the great international politician here, and in that he would show his international accomplishments. A peace deal, for many people who live and work in Afghanistan and know the situation, a peace deal at this moment in time seems to be difficult to imagine for many of those who live in Afghanistan and who know the country. Of course you can create the deal, but if it will hold, that is a different question. So there is different narratives. The political narrative, I also get this in Brussels a lot, by the way, from the European External Action Service. We are talking chances for peace. We are moving forward. We have such good talks with the government. At the same time, we have a humanitarian situation which is worsening, and we are working for the same institution. You have to see that. And so there is different views of seeing the situation. Should we be optimistic? For me, it is difficult to be optimistic, but I might be wrong. I'm biased in what I'm saying here. Let's hope for the best. One thing is certain, even if we get a peace deal, and even if the peace deal is a good peace deal, which is possible, the humanitarian needs in Afghanistan will remain for a long period of time, because you cannot eradicate the humanitarian situation, critical humanitarian situation, just by making a peace deal. What we would need is a rather competent government, an accepted government, which would bring some structure into the country, and we would need security and safety, which then immediately will lead to economic development. That is what we would like to see and would like to achieve. It's not my job. I'm not a politician. I'm talking about humanitarian aid here, but this is of course the background which would be required. Now, that is my presentation. I cut it a bit short. I will show you a few more pictures, and then if you wish, of course, you may ask questions. Thanks. Bear with me, I come with the pictures. Right, here we go again. That's the same boy as before, as you can see. And you can see that he's receiving medical treatment there, and he lost an arm and a leg, playing with some unexploded device in the garden of his house. And his sister was killed during the same incident. You know, you have these kind of mines and grenades which are bit under the ground, and the children pick them up, they play with them, and then they explode. This would be an eco-funded, this is done by Handicap International, by the way. Now it's called Humanity Inclusive, when they changed their name. ECHO funds them, and it is an activity which is aiming at providing medical aid in cases of trauma, in particular this prosthesis and rehabilitation activities. Same boy, he's doing his exercises there. That's the workshop. Actually, it was very impressive. There is an extremely good mood at that place, because all the people who come there and who receive these prostheses, they know that they're privileged, and you may find it depressing to see or very difficult to bear, but most people there and most people coming there and being helped there, they're really very positive and optimistic. You also see it's also, for this, DG ECHO is not better than any UN agency or USAID. For us, it's very important when you fund it that we always get to see the European flag there in the upper right corner of the picture. We call it the visibility policy. Still the same workshop. This gentleman, being handicapped himself, he found a job there, obviously, and he's one of the technicians there helping to build these gadgets, these prostheses. Right, another project, education. I mentioned education in emergency being relatively important nowadays. What is interesting in the picture? The really interesting thing in the picture is that on the right-hand side there are girls. This is not a given in Afghanistan. Many of the educational activities for decades would only have been available for boys. Nobody would even have thought about letting his female kids, girl kids, going to school. And this is of course implemented and pushed through the international community a little bit. And we consider that quite a success. And this is even another one because this is like really a girls' class. Don't get this wrong, this is not a proper school. This is like a house in that case that was in Kandahar, the province of Kandahar, about like 400 kilometers southwest of Kabul, a very conservative area of the country where private people make a little house available and where the children can go for 2 hours per day and they receive a very basic and simple education provided or helped by the funds of ECHO and being implemented by Save the Children Netherlands in this case. And here we are now in Herat. Herat is at the Iranian border in the northwest, drought affected. Well, just to show you the faces of kids and the youngsters, which you immediately have at your tail as soon as you're getting off the car with your team. Right. Water and sanitation. Dakar. You see ERM, standing for Emergency Response Mechanism. And this is like an information sheet provided by Dakar, Dakar being a very well-known Danish NGO with which we work often. And they are the Water and Sanitation Coordination NGO in Afghanistan. And if you look at the picture, you know it shows you, well, it's basically a visual display on what you should do, what you should not do, how water remains safe, that you should not take the water at places where the cows are urinating into the river and things like that. And this is a funny one. Then of course immediately you have one of the village elders who sees us and then he's very proud to show the picture and that it's on display in his little community. Again, Dakar and ECHO, you see on the ECHO logo, and Dakar is the implementer. And this is a water tank, a tank with safe water. Very simple, but very important. And if there wouldn't be this tank, these people wouldn't have any water, or they would drink the rainwater in winter, which collects in some ditch, and everybody would get ill very quickly. Another IDP camp. This is in Kalinau, in the province of Badghis, at the border with, well, up north, border with Uzbekistan. Again, you see the NRC tents, sponsored by ECHO. You see up front the tents of the people which had arrived in the last couple of days, which have not been helped and supplied yet. And it is a dire and poor situation. You have to imagine the temperature there will be, well, to be on the Fahrenheit scale, maybe 40, 45 degrees in November. It's cold, people are not well dressed, many children are bare feet, the families are living under these straw balloons, or if they have been helped already in those tents, which are very often not heated. And this is where people would live once they arrive. IDPs, you know, having traveled or walked many dozens of kilometers, leaving their home village because they couldn't do their agriculture anymore because of the drought. What you see there behind these kids, that is their house. They live behind this curtain there, and hopefully they would receive a tent in the next couple of days. And last but not least, one of the big problems, or one of the big issues, one of the things that are very much needed in these camps where you have like displaced people settling, are toilets. So we built a lot of toilets. Again, you see Dakar and the Eco logo, and well, very basic sanitation facilities are what we are funding on a large scale. And that was already the last slide. Thank you very much. Any questions? Don't hesitate.